The Dim Hypothesis by Leonard Peikoff, an ambitious book which attempts to formulate certain prognostications regarding the future of the Western world based upon a certain study of its past. So, Leonard Peikoff, if you are unfamiliar with that name, is a former professor of philosophy who was also the designated intellectual heir of the ever controversial Ayn Rand. Now, don't click off just yet. I know what reaction that name can elicit in some people, but like I say, don't bail on me just yet, because there's some really good stuff in this book, or at the very least, some really interesting stuff, I will say. Now, last year, I actually read and reviewed Leonard Peikoff's earlier book, The Ominous Parallels, which is a philosophical analysis of Nazi Germany and the relationship between the ideas which eventually gave rise to the Third Reich and modern America, and how those same ideas have kind of crept into the American psyche over time. And I have to say this, regardless of whatever you think of Ayn Rand, regardless of whatever opinion you may hold of her, this book freaking slaps right here. The Ominous Parallels absolutely slaps. It is a fantastic philosophical autopsy of the Third Reich, which really shows just how deep the roots of Nazism ran, and also provides pretty salient warnings about how those same notions have, again, crept into the American mind over time. Now, the final chapter of this book is effectively just an advert for objectivism, which essentially positions Rand as like the freaking messiah, the savior of the world, potentially. It's just pure glazing, essentially, in that last chapter. But that aside, I want to reiterate, the Ominous Parallels really do slap. I really could strongly recommend this book. It is a fantastic work of philosophical investigation, I think. But the reason I bring this up is because these two books relate to each other. The Ominous Parallels was Leonard Peikoff's first book, and The Dim Hypothesis is effectively his last book. It is his major statement regarding the Western world and what he believes will likely be the fate of the Western world. Both of these books kind of again relate to each other. There's some carryover here. In the end of The Dim Hypothesis kind of ties back into The Ominous Parallels. But once again, this book really do slap, and I could really recommend this. But anyway, so what is The Dim Hypothesis? What does dim mean? Well, dim here is an acronym standing for disintegration, integration, and misintegration. These words relate to philosophical conceptualization. And I want to say this up front. If you are considering reading this book, or if by the end of this video I have piqued your interest sufficiently to consider picking this book up, I would not recommend reading this book without first... Well, actually, I would not recommend reading The Dim Hypothesis without first reading The Ominous Parallels, because, again, they kind of relate to each other, and there's some carryover, and I think you would probably be best served to read this before that. But I would also recommend not reading The Dim Hypothesis before reading Ayn Rand's book on epistemology, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. I don't know that it's strictly necessary that you read this before The Dim Hypothesis, but I feel like you may not fully grasp the nature of what Peikoff is really asserting here. You may not fully grasp what he's saying with the dim hypothesis. So if you are curious to read this book, I would recommend reading Rand's book, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, first. But anyway, dim, disintegration, integration, and misintegration. These words pertain to, again, philosophical conceptualization and the modes of thought with which people engage with reality. Now, these words are exemplified by three philosophers, according to Leonard Peikoff. Misintegration, is represented by Plato. I integration is represented by Aristotle, and D disintegration is represented by Immanuel Kant. So Platonism, Plato's philosophy, is uh, essentially a doctrine of two worlds. It is a doctrine positing the existence of two separate realms, a higher, extra spatial, extra temporal world of forms, Platonic ideals, and our actual, like, material universe, which is uh, basically like a dim, pun intended, shadow of the higher world of forms. This, according to Peikoff, is an example of misintegration. It is not a proper engagement with reality because it is positing a kind of a certain level of supernaturalism. There's kind of a mystical element to it. That there is some sort of higher reality which cannot be directly perceived. That again, this is kind of an example of misintegration. Now we come on to I integration, which is typified by Aristotle, whom Peikoff and Rand posit as the true integrator. This is proper philosophical conceptualization. This is proper engagement with reality, because Aristotle did not, his philosophy did not rest upon a dualistic cosmology. Rather, it only asserts the existence of this observable world, and moreover, that we as people can have actual knowledge of this world, and that we can, have understanding, and that we can make predictions based upon what we understand, such as scientific predictions. And that this is like the true proper way to, this is the truly proper mode of thought. And then we have Immanuel Kant, who is, in objectivist canon, pretty much the Antichrist. He is a man whose system of philosophy, Peikoff and Rand both assert, has had very detrimental effects on the Western world. And if that may come across as hyperbolic, I have to say it's really not as hyperbolic as you might think it is. Kant's critical philosophy has done a number on the Western mind, and this book does a pretty good job of showing why that is. And Kant represents disintegration, the D, because Kant posited that no actual knowledge of reality can be had at all, because again, we can never know the thing in itself. We can never know noumenal reality. All that we will ever know is our own phenomenal experience. And so actual true knowledge of reality as it truly is forever barred to us. Kant thus represents D, disintegration. And that is essentially the overview of the acronym, what the dim hypothesis is. But the book is concerned with analyzing Western culture in like the entirety of Western culture. This book's not even very long. It's less than 350 pages, but it runs the gamut all the way from ancient Greece to now. And it analyzes all these different eras and assigns them different letters, whether they are a D, an I, or an M culture. And also, I want to say this, there are two different variants of M and D. There's only one I, because if you are properly integrating, then there's only one right way to do things. So if you are integrating properly, then that's it. You're doing things the right way. But D and M have variants D1 and D2 and M1 and M2. And these are like progressions of this mode of thought. M1 and D1, things are getting sketchy, but when you get to M2 and D2, that's when you're really in trouble societally, because you're really losing the plot at that point. But Peikoff analyzes all these different cultures through this lens, but he analyzes four main areas of culture, those being literature, science, education, and politics. So he starts with ancient Greece, which he says is like an I culture. Even though Plato was a major intellectual player in ancient Greece, Peikoff really holds Aristotle aloft as being like the best that ancient Greece produced, and that his influence is what really uh, lent to ancient Greece its I status. Because the ancient Greeks, they gave us democracy as we know it. We see the first formulations of some type of not only philosophical systems but scientific systems as well. And also, he analyzes like Greek tragedy, their literature, and shows how everything is like properly unified, everything is orderly, and it all takes a certain shape. It all is structured a certain way. And also, their politics, again, democratic. They were very they despite being democratic, they had certain ideals that they held to, such as pretty surprisingly, well, for a time at least, pretty surprisingly staunch defense of property rights as well. And their educational system was very well balanced between, like, physical education with gymnasiums and stuff like that, but also geometry, the study of Homer and stuff like that. We see a culture which, though not without flaws, and Peikoff, I don't think, would say that they were perfect or anything like that, but they were on the right track. They were doing a lot right. And so he says that ancient Greece is an I culture. It was an I culture, but eventually ancient Greece collapsed. The Athenian Empire collapsed, and eventually we come from Greece to Rome. And Rome, Peikoff asserts, was an M culture because Rome is kind of a degeneration philosophically from ancient Greece. Their education was inferior in a lot of ways to the Greek system of education. Their literature was kind of just diluted copies of what had come before. Like the Aeneid is like an offshoot of the Iliad, but it doesn't have the same mentality. The Iliad, Homer really, he portrayed figures such as Achilles who were like very heroic and very like independently minded. Like it was a kind of an individualistic culture to an extent, at least in Athens anyway. Whereas like Aeneas in Virgil's Aeneid is very duty bound. He's very he's a slave to the gods. Basically, we see a degeneration from a more independent mindset into a more collectivist mentality, because Rome eventually was characterized by some serious collectivism as time went on. And so Rome, Peikoff asserts, was an M culture, and then eventually the Roman Empire collapsed, and we come to like the Dark Ages, the medieval era, which was under the authority pretty much of the Catholic Church. And Peikoff also assigns an M status to the medieval Dark Ages because this was when the Catholic Church was operating primarily under a Platonic framework, which of course comes directly from the influence of St. Augustine, who was, prior to becoming a Christian, a Platonist. So we see that Plato is kind of a philosophical precursor in some ways to Christianity, because they both posit the existence of a material, sensible realm and then a super sensible higher realm. And Peikoff, of course, assigns an M status to this culture. But actually, he assigns, I believe, an M2 status to this culture. And that's why we have the freaking Dark Ages, right? There wasn't a whole lot new coming out of the Dark Ages. That's why they're called the Dark Ages. The lights weren't just dim; the lights were kind of out in that era. But with the rediscovery of the work of Aristotle by Thomas Aquinas, things were kind of ameliorated. Things got better, and the Western world reversed from an M2 back to an M1 culture, according to Peikoff, with, again, the rediscovery of Aristotle by Thomas Aquinas. And it was Aristotle's influence which eventually paved the way for the Renaissance. After the Catholic Church adopted a more Aristotelian philosophical framework and kind of abandoned the Platonism of Augustine, not only was the road paved for the eventual Renaissance, but also the Catholic Church's influence began to wane somewhat as we started to see the rise, especially in the Renaissance, of a certain secularism. So things got better. And then eventually, after the Renaissance, after the Reformation, we eventually come to the Enlightenment. And this, Peikoff asserts, is the I moment of the modern West. We were really firing on all cylinders with the Enlightenment. I mean, scientific breakthrough after scientific breakthrough, a lot of political reform, the actual birth of the United States as a country. People were engaging with reality in a much more productive, much more, according to Peikoff's book, correct way. We also saw the birth of like modern capitalism. Standards of living began rising. We saw an explosion of knowledge, and also the religious influence on society began to be kind of backburnered in favor of like first deism and then eventually like kind of just agnosticism across the board. It's not to say that religion, that Christianity like disappeared. Obviously it didn't, but we saw people kind of breaking with the chains of the past as regards their thought, their freedom of thought, and things got a lot better. And so Peikoff asserts that the Enlightenment is the I moment of the West. It was a true integrated culture. But then, with the advent of that pesky Immanuel Kant, the Enlightenment was effectively killed, and we degenerated into an M, and then now into a D culture. And that brings us to the end of the book where Peikoff is analyzing our world at present. And like he analyzes again the four major areas we have. Like in literature, we see the rise in the early 20th century of modernism with books such as Ulysses and To the Lighthouse. And this is probably going to be pretty contentious because I know those books are like extremely acclaimed books. But Peikoff asserts that these are actually harbingers of societal degeneration because we start to lose the plot, pun intended, because those books don't really even have a plot in the classical sense. The values that those books put forth were not nearly they weren't nearly like the old values. That we're seeing a certain decline in mentality, in mindset, in terms of art. And of course that's just literature. Like you could go into like the actual like art like painting and stuff, and you have stuff like Jackson Pollock, which is just a pile of crap. It's just, it looks like something a child drew, and you can seriously start to see artistically a degeneration from like the artwork of the Renaissance, like the Mona Lisa or the Sistine Chapel, and then you start to get to Jackson Pollock, and it's just not even recognizable as art. But then again, that's just in literature and art. We come to science, and this, of course, is also going to be highly contentious, because Leonard Peikoff is not a physicist, but he asserts that the physics of Einstein also represents something of a degeneration from the more elegant physics of Newtonian physics. I mean, Isaac Newton is kind of was at the vanguard of the Enlightenment. He was one of the most revolutionary figures in science because he established an inductive method of science based upon empirical observation, whereas Einstein's physics, Peikoff says, is more rationalistic. It's not really, it's sort of disconnected in a way from like empirical reality to an extent. Like it's again, this is going to be contentious, I know, and he's not saying that like Einstein is like necessarily wrong. That's not what he's saying. It's not so much about the conclusion so much as it is about the method. That Newton's physics were more elegant, more systematic, more properly systematic. But not just Einstein. He also goes after quantum mechanics. And again, this I can see a lot of people saying, how in the ever-loving hell are you really going to assert that quantum mechanics is indicative of social decline? Well, that is because quantum mechanics as it is typically postulated, kind of just flaunts the basic laws of thought. Like Kant's influence on science was exemplified in the positivist movement as kind of represented, embodied by Auguste Comte. Um, and then from there, Peikoff asserts that science has just kind of degenerated until we eventually reached the level of quantum mechanics, where you have physicists that genuinely say that, like have you ever heard some quantum physicists say that, like, you can never know, like, the position of an electron in regards to the nucleus of an atom, it can never be known to us. It's essentially, they're saying it's like everywhere at once, that you can't know where the electron is at any given time. It's like quantum, it's kind of, the uncertainty principle. It's like quantum indeterminacy. The electron is, for all intents and purposes, everywhere at once. That is flatly impossible according to classical Aristotelian logic. Again, the law of non-contradiction, a thing cannot be in two places at once. Now, again, Peikoff is not saying that there's not valuable work being done in these fields. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that, like, in lieu of postulating absurdities such as saying that a thing, an electron, can be in two different places at the same time, which is, according to Aristotelian logic, not possible, it would be better just to say that we don't know, that an answer can be found, that the electron does exist in one specific place at one specific time. We just don't have, as of yet, the sufficient method or technology to say that. But not only that, he goes, of course, through education. We get an analysis of, like, the progressive movement in the early 20th century in the United States. Progressive education, as exemplified by, like, John Dewey, very serious decline in education. I mean, good heavens, the United States produces kids that can't read the see, spot, and run or add 2 and 2 nowadays. Education's gone to crap. And then, of course, we get to politics. The entire 20th century is just one long nightmare in much of the world, whether it be Russia, Germany, Italy. It's all just, we see a degeneration from the principles of individual rights, natural law, which really dominated the Enlightenment, which was the I era of the modern West, according to Peikoff. And then it has degenerated into an M culture. But now, leaving the 20th century behind, Peikoff asserts that we have reached the D era, that we have reached the era of disintegration. So that brings us to the final section of the book, where Peikoff asserts what he believes will be the ultimate future of the Western world, at least for a considerable period of time. Like, he's not saying that anything is going to last forever, but that the coming decades, the coming generations, bode pretty ill. And I want to say this, before we get into what Peikoff predicts for the future, I want to say a word on historicism. Because, like, I've read Oswald Spengler's The Decline of the West, which is a work of pure historicism. Historicism meaning the belief that history operates according to fixed and immutable laws, and that, like, accurate predictions can be made. When I picked this book up, I was like, for a philosophy which prides itself on logic and reason, there's no way that Peikoff could actually be, like, putting forth some kind of historicist thesis here. And thankfully, that is not what he's saying. That is not at all what he's saying with this book. He is not subscribing to any type of historicism here, because he's not saying that there is necessarily a set progression from I to M to D. Because we've seen in the past, again, according to his kind of historiography here, we've seen the West turn back. We've seen things revert from an M2 back to an M1, and then eventually to an I culture. So what Peikoff ultimately predicts for the West, he's not at all saying that this is set in stone and then it can't be changed. He's just saying, if this continues, if these trends continue, here's what I say will happen. So what does Peikoff actually say will be the future of the West? His prediction is that the West will, or specifically America, will eventually succumb to some form of religious totalitarianism. That. Had you told me that, you know, as little as like 2 or 3 years ago, had you suggested to me that the modern United States would succumb to some form of religious totalitarianism, I would have probably scoffed at that. I mean, the percentage of people in the United States which profess to identify as like some type of theists, predominantly Christians, decreases by the year. But, but, but that may be subject to change. So Peikoff posits in the final sections of this book that the rise of some kind of religious totalitarianism would constitute a reversion from a D culture, which he asserts we are in now, to an M culture. Because as bad as like communist Russia and Nazi Germany were, those were still M cultures. Like D is like the worst, I think. D represents true disintegration. And he points to Weimar Germany specifically as being representative of a D era. And that's why I say this it relates to the ominous parallels, because Weimar Germany was a D culture. It was it was a it was an era of basically chaos economically, culturally. Things really came unraveled, and of course Hitler stepped in, and then things turned to an M culture, which that's not in any way an endorsement of Nazi Germany, but it is some kind of stability. It's some type of it is a framework. Now it is not. I don't think anyone would say that is the proper framework, but there was some type of ideological uh, scaffolding here that was holding things up. And Peikoff points to modern America as being essentially in the same situation. And this is what I was going to say. Had you told me, like as little as 2 or 3 years ago, that you predict that the United States would eventually succumb to some type of religious totalitarianism. Now, he does not explicitly say Christian, like he thinks that it will be Christian because the United States is historically such a strongly Christian country, but he just says religious totalitarianism. But had you suggested that to me a few years ago, I would not have believed that. I would have scoffed at that. But again, big but here, big but here. We are seeing a resurgence of religion in the U.S. And more than that, we're seeing the emergence of a very militant type of religion here in the U.S. I'm talking specifically about the rise of Christian nationalism, whether it be of a Protestant or a Catholic persuasion, because there is that movement called integralism, I believe, which is like an attempt to infuse traditional Catholicism, like tradcath stuff, with government to essentially kind of make a something of a theocracy. And like what I think that Peikoff is correct about is that the D culture will eventually burn itself out, and I think we're seeing that now. Like we're seeing that now. The disintegration that we are caught up in now, I think is kind of playing itself out simply because it's really not viable. Like we exist now in a culture of kind of just pure chaos where even the word woman, even words such as woman, are basically indefinable nowadays. We're seeing a total detachment from objective reality from a large segment of the population. But because of that, I think that will essentially it contains the seeds of its own destruction within it, as Peikoff himself asserts here, just like it did in Weimar Germany. There were a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff in Weimar Germany that directly parallels, ominously parallels, what we see now in the U.S. as regards certain sexual practices, certain, not to mention certain economic things, such as we just recently saw some kind of runaway inflation in our own time, which of course we all know about the inflation in Germany in that era. But the culture of Weimar Germany does parallel the culture of modern America to an extent, and the culture of Weimar Germany eventually fizzled out and like it just kind of disintegrated, and it eventually was usurped by Hitler. The Third Reich, the M culture supplanted the D culture. And Peikoff, this is his ultimate argument, is that this will be what happens in America. And again, I'm not saying that this is necessarily going to happen. Peikoff himself is not saying that this is necessarily going to happen. All he's saying is that this probably is going to happen. And again, because the D culture here in the United States, I think, is burning itself out because it's just not really viable. And by D culture, I mean the type of like woke postmodernism, which has infested so many institutions, from the media to the universities to Hollywood, etc. That type of mentality, despite dominating so many of these cultural institutions, they're still losing the culture war. Like, it's still coming apart. That vision is not really holding up so well. I don't think. So I do agree with Peikoff insofar as he asserts that the D is probably going to do what D does and disintegrate, and then an M culture of some sort will step in to fill the gap. Now, he says religious totalitarianism. Again, you can subsume a lot under the term religious. It does not just have to mean Christian, but I would point out that we are seeing not only an uptick in religious affiliation because our modern world is so chaotic and so like just insane in so many ways. A lot of young people, especially a lot of young men, are really looking to religion, Christianity specifically. And again, I have long been quite sympathetic to Christianity myself. I'm not trying to throw shade. I'm just saying that, like, because our modern culture is just pure chaos pretty much at this point, a lot of young people, specifically a lot of young men, are looking to religion as a means of giving their lives purpose and direction. And according to Peikoff, the militant atheist here, that represents an M. That is a misintegration. It is a type of integration. Like, there is a framework here, but according again to Peikoff, that represents a misintegration. And this will eventually supplant the disintegration which we are experiencing now, and stands to dominate the Western world for some time to come. Now, as for Europe, again, this is kind of America-centric to a degree, because America is by far the most Christian industrialized nation of the West. When it comes to Europe, he just kind of writes Europe off as saying that whatever they succumb to, it will probably be Islam. And I was like, spot on there, Dr. Peikoff. I don't think that doesn't even take a philosophy degree to see that coming. But for America, he foresees some type of religious totalitarianism, and he implies he thinks it will be some kind of Christian nationalism. So that is Peikoff's ultimate prediction for what is coming for the West, what is likely coming for the West. But he does leave room for hope. His prescription for fighting this coming dark age, this coming M culture, is the same exact message that he gave in his first book, The Ominous Parallels, which is embrace objectivism, save the world, become objectivist, save the world. That's his prescription for turning things around. Take that how you will. But this book is very interesting, I thought. It offers a certain lens, which I think is fairly unique to view the history of the West through. And by the way, I should have said it up front, this only concerns the West because Leonard Peikoff is a professor of specifically Western philosophy. He just says right up front, I don't have a clue about Eastern philosophy like the Tao or stuff like that. I don't know anything about that. So like this is only covering the history of the West, but it is covering the history of the West in a very interesting way, I think. It is definitely contestable. This is not something that I think everybody will subscribe to. But I think there is some real value here because it is always, always, always philosophy which drives the world. If there is one thing that Rand and Peikoff have impressed upon me as a reader of their works is that it is always philosophy that drives the world. In fact, there is a quote in this book at the end of this book which he gives by someone named Dionysius of Halicarnassus. I'm not familiar with that figure. I don't know who the hell that was, but the quote by this figure is that history is philosophy teaching by examples. And I could not endorse that sentiment more heartily. That, I think, is what history is. It is philosophy teaching by examples. And this book, again, analyzes the history of Western philosophy and the history of the various modes of Western thought. And it posits that different modes render different outcomes, but that this is not fated. This is not destined to be. An M can become an I, a D can become an M, etc. Things can change. Things can be turned around. Nothing. It's never too late. Nothing is hopeless. All is not lost. But that is what the dim hypothesis is broadly, insofar as I can give it: disintegration, integration, and misintegration, and how these modes of thought have shaped Western culture throughout the years. It's a very interesting book, and it presents this argument very compellingly, I think. It really does. It's, again, once more, not something that everybody is going to be in agreement with, but I think it's worth a look, actually. I really do think that it's worth a look. I think that there is some value in here. Even if you don't ultimately come away subscribing to Peikoff's argument, I think that it is at least worth checking out because it does offer a unique perspective on history, which, once more, is pretty compelling, I think. So, The Dim Hypothesis by Leonard Peikoff. Have you read this book? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with it or me. And if you haven't read this book, like I say, I could really recommend this because it is very interesting, and I was really engrossed when reading it. But like I say, first I would recommend reading definitely Ayn Rand's Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, because I don't know that you will really fully grasp the dim hypothesis without first reading this to understand the epistemological foundation upon which Peikoff is building this theory. But also I would recommend reading The Ominous Parallels first, because this is kind of dim in miniature. Like, this is only concerned with Nazi Germany, whereas the dim hypothesis subsumes Nazi Germany and is looking at the entire history of the West. But they are very similar in what they ultimately do. But yeah, I would recommend reading The Ominous Parallels first. But like I say, I could recommend this book, even though I acknowledge that it's something that a lot of people will probably disagree with. It is fascinating, if nothing else. So I could recommend it based on that, if nothing else. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.